Hello, BookTube. I have a Tuesday Reads for you. It's usually Tag Tuesday on Tuesdays, but nobody's tagging me on anything because everybody hates me because I smell. So we're doing just Tuesday Reads, Tuesday TBR torture. I've got 6 books that I want to show you and a treat at the end. So the 6 books that I want to show you, of the 6, I have read 4, and there are 2 that I haven't read that are right on the launch pad. They'll be read this week at the very latest. And the first one, when I say I have read it, I haven't read it in this form. I've read the books that it reprints and loved them, and I'm very happy to see them reprinted again for a general audience. This is not. This is going to be an $18 paperback, and I think this comes out later in the month. Let's see here. When does this come out? Yeah, this comes out at the very end of August. From the folks at Harper, and this is the collected novels of Charles Wright. In an $18 paperback, you get the 3 novels. So you get The Messenger, The Wig, and Absolutely Nothing to Get Alarmed About. And Charles Wright, with the cover has, the volume has an introduction by Ishmael Reed, and has a blurb from James Baldwin. It seems sometimes to be scarcely a book at all, but a happening. And this is the 3 novels that made this writer famous and have made him sort of a cult favorite ever since he wrote them. And when I got the volume, I was very happy to have it. It's another example of the curiously healthy reprint culture that you can sometimes find in some parts of the American publishing world. I'm very happy that Harper did this, and I think it generated from a Dwight Garner essay, a recent Dwight Garner essay that got people thinking about Charles Wright again for the first time in a decade. But one way or another, although I have the book now, and I'm very happy to have it, it'll go on a shelf of keepers. I didn't reread everything in it. I reread The Wig, the middle novel, The Wig, which starts out, I was a desperate man. Quarterly, I got that crawly feeling in my wafer-thin stomach. During these fasting days, I had the temper of a Greek mountain dog. It was hard to maintain a smile. Everyone seemed to jet toward the goal of the great society, while I remained in the outhouse, penniless, without connections. Pretty girls, credit cards, charge accounts, fancy suits, fine shoes, Dobbs hats, XKE Jaguars, and more pretty girls cluttered my butterscotch-colored dreams. Lord, I'd work like a slave, but how to acquire an acquisitional gimmick? Mercy! Something had to fall from the tree of fortune. Tom-toms were signaling to my frustrated brain. The message? I had to make it. And we follow this character throughout the book, and it's even more delightful. I like Charles Wright more every time I reread him. But I kept reading along in The Wig, and there's an early scene where the main character is going to try some hair pomade. It has been highly touted to him, and it makes him happy. The idea. Well, this is a great line. The pomade is called Silky Smooth, and he writes, Silky Smooth, using a formula perfected by a Lapp tribe in Norway, posed no problems. Let's see here. Yes, he's quoting from the ad copy for Silky Smooth. And he says, yes, indeed, a wild excitement engulfed me. My mirrored reflection reflected in an occult fashion a magnificent future. I hadn't felt so good since discovering last year that I actually disliked watermelon. and he goes on. But the next step was the most difficult act of my life. I had to wait 5 minutes until the pomade penetrated, stiffened, evaporated. 5 minutes of suffering. I stood tall like the great-great-grandson of slaves, of sharecroppers, old-world royalty. Tall like a stormtrooper, like an honor scout. Yes, I'd stalk that druggist if this experiment failed. Lord, it couldn't fail. I'm Walter Mitty's target-colored stepson. Sweet dreams zipped through my eye. A politician had prophesied that it was extremely likely a Negro would be elected president of the United States in the year 2000. Being realistic, I could just picture myself as chairman of the Handyman's Union, addressing the Committee on Foreign Relations and then being castrated. At least I no longer have to phone Mr. Fishback, the necrophilic funeral director, each time I went downtown. What a relief that would be. The dimes I'd save. I don't know, now that I think about it, now that I read that, those are bravura comic timing lines. But now that I read them out loud, I wonder what a reader born in the 21st century will make of any of that. Anyway, I loved it. It was great to revisit the wig, and I will read the others. I will read the other novels, but that is one of the 4 things that I've got to show you here. In late August, you're going to have this in your bookstores. $18 for 3 Charles Wright novels. Can't go wrong with that kind of money. And who knows how long it'll be until you see it again, and who knows what the chances are that you'll ever see any of these in a used book store. So it counts as a recommendation. Next one also counts as a recommendation, and that is extremely unlikely when it comes to me. This is by Martin Gayford. It's a Thames and Hudson trade paperback, and it's called The Man with a Blue Scarf on Sitting for a Portrait by Lucian Freud. And it is an account of Lucian Freud, his life, what he was like in person, his table talk, and what it's like to sit for one of his famous portraits by someone who did that. And this is a lovely Thames and Hudson trade paperback that has black and white and color artwork all throughout of Lucian Freud, and a whole bunch of other things too. I mean, you've got Titian. There's Titian. You've got a whole bunch of. It's an utterly lovely trade paperback treatment of this book. The book would be worth reading anyway. And the reason that it seems unlikely to me is because I'm one of the only people I know who doesn't like the artwork of Lucian Freud at all. And I know that he's immensely popular, and people really do love him. So it's not just pretentious people. So it's probably just that he's not doing something on my wavelength. I'm just somehow probably not getting his artwork. And maybe that'll happen in time. I'm only 28. It's true. I'm virtually all-knowing and extremely, even moltenly sexy. But I still have the odd 1 or 2 thing to learn. So it could be. This book didn't do it. It didn't make me a Lucian Freud fan, but boy, is it a terrific book. And when I was reading it, I couldn't help but think how richer we would all be if people who sat for portraits for all the great artists throughout time had written books like this. Oh my, what I wouldn't give. Oh, there was something fascinating on every page. So I think this came out originally as a kind of ornate, art-sized book of some kind. I don't think it looked like this when it came out originally. This is a new paperback that comes out in early September from Thames and Hudson. And even though it's a paperback, it's $17 and it's fully illustrated, black and white and color, all sorts of stuff. I really liked it, and I believe that I would have liked it just as much even if it had no illustrations. I think the writer does a really good job. Then this next book is for kids. I'm not really sure. I'm not a real expert on the precise breakdowns, K through whatever. I'm not still really clear on what middle school is or anything like that. But this is a book probably for very young kids. It's from the DC Zoom imprint, which is an imprint that DC is. They're bringing out these little $10 mass market, $10 paperbacks of children's versions of their superhero characters. They just did one recently that I just reviewed called Dear Justice League, in which a bunch of kids write letters to the Justice League, and the Justice League reads them, and it provokes all sorts of stories and memories from them, answering the kids' questions. This is, I mean, I read this in 2 minutes. It's charming in its way. It has a kind of tongue-in-cheek, adult-style irony, so that kids might miss, but that adults will like. But I had mixed reactions to it. It's extremely well done. It's by Art Baltazar and Franco. Franco is the artist, and it's called Superman of Smallville. And it comes out. What have we got here? This comes out in the very first week of September, and this is the story of Clark Kent in Smallville, having adventures. There is an alien artifact that is terrorizing beautiful downtown Smallville, and Clark Kent's friends think that the science club thinks they can hunt it down and find out what it is. Clark goes along with them, at least in part, to protect his own secret identity. And while they're out tramping away in the woods, he finds a dog. And it turns out in the course of the book that the dog is Krypto. That the dog is just not just a stray dog, but a dog from his homeworld of Krypton. And you might say, well, okay, it's Smallville. It's Clark Kent and his teenage friends. It's Krypto the Superdog. Why would you have negative reactions? Why would you be ambivalent? You talk all the time on this channel ad nauseum about how you love that iteration. But the key is I love that iteration of Superboy, not Superman. This is a Clark Kent who's a teenager. He's in high school. He's hiding his secret identity from Lana Lang. He meets Crypto, the superdog, for the first time. He's living with Ma and Pa Kent at the Kent farm and doing chores and doing homework and being grounded. That's not Superman. That's Superboy. That's Clark Kent. That's Superman when he was a boy. And the reason that it gave me a sort of sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach is because if DC Zoom and its corporate masters of DC just Incorporated are willing to sink money into making a book like this, it must be that somewhere on some corporate or legal level, they have given up the fight to ever have Superboy again as a product, as a franchise, as an IP, an intellectual property that they can make comic books out of. This should be Superboy of Smallville. Why isn't it? DC Comics has been in and out of court about the Superboy title forever and ever, and I'm starting to think that this means that I'm never going to see anything that says Superboy again, in the sense of Superboy being the teenage version of the character created by Siegel and Schuster. So you can make a Superboy who's something else. You can make a Superboy who's a clone or whatever. But as far as the teenage version of Superman, this book leads me to think that that has been legally entailed to the point where there's no hope. I don't know. So on the one level, I really enjoyed this, but on the other hand, when this character floats up into the sky, spreads his arms out wide, and says, "I'm Superman," I kept saying, "No, you're not. Not yet. You're not. Superman is Metropolis, not Smallville. Smallville is Superboy." But I liked it, and I can certainly recommend it to kids. I'm going to give it to a kid this weekend. And then the next one, the last of the books that I have read. We saw the advance copy on this channel, and I was a little dubious. And then I read it, and oh my God, is it good. It is a mindless thriller, but when it comes to mindless thrillers, you are not going to be sorry for this. We saw this already. This is by Linwood Barclay. I think this is his second book. And it's called Elevator Pitch. And it's got a blurb from Stephen King, one hell of a suspense novel. It's terrific. Absolutely terrific. Let me read you just a bit. The tagline at the top of the dust jacket says this is going to do what for elevators what Psycho did for showers and Jaws did for the beach. And when I finished this book, the mere thought, the next time I go on an elevator, I know that I'm going to hesitate. I know that I'm going to say, maybe I should just take the stairs. I know that I am. And that's great when a book gets under your skin like that. I've had that happen a few times. When I read Dune originally, the first time, eons ago, I remember when I finished the book, being extra conscious of water wastage. I kept thinking, water is precious on Dune. So do I really need to be wasting it like this? And does anybody else need to be wasting it like this? That's neat when a book does that. And it doesn't have to be a grand book, obviously. Like, for instance, Dean Koontz's novel, Lightning, which has the sort of outward trappings of a horror novel, but really it's a science fiction novel. And those of you who've read it will know the gimmick at the middle of it. And when I was finished with that book, the next time there was a lightning storm, I immediately flashed to that book. And for a while afterwards, I did as well. I'm sure this is going to have the same effect on me when it comes to elevators. But let me read you just a bit. It begins on a Monday when 4 people board an elevator in a Manhattan office tower. Each presses the button for their floor, but the elevator proceeds nonstop to the top. Once there, it pauses for a few seconds, but the doors don't open. Instead, the elevator begins to descend floor by floor, and then it plummets right to the bottom of the shaft. And believe it or not, Linwood Barclay makes the great narrative choice to take us inside that car. We watch those people as they're making uncomfortable conversation of the type you get in elevators, as they're trying to figure out, should we call somebody? Should we hit the call button? What's going to happen here? The author, is it he? Yes, the author takes us inside that car. That is great. That makes it very immediate. It appears to be a random accident, the kind of thing that seems to happen all too often in a city like New York. Cranes collapse, subway fire, elevator malfunction. But on Tuesday, it happens again, in a different Manhattan skyscraper. And then Wednesday brings yet another tragic high-rise catastrophe. In only 3 days, one of the most vertical cities in the world, the nation's capital of media, finance, and entertainment, is plunged into chaos. And the second of those elevator mishaps, the one thing that our characters in the first elevator mishap don't do, is try to pry open the doors to see if they're near enough to climb out of the elevator. That's the one thing they don't do. It would have occurred to them if they'd had a chance, but they don't have enough time. The second elevator mishap that does occur to one of the people in the elevator, the idea occurs to her, let's force open the doors and see if we're close enough to an opening on a floor to crawl out. And she is, and she and she does. And then she remembers, oh, I left my purse in the elevator. And she reaches her into the elevator to ask the kid who's still in there to hand her her purse. And I'm betting you can guess what happens. And the book has all sorts of the usual stuff. There's a nefarious Russian subplot that is, let's just say, unlikely, and it continues to expand. It is the heart of the book. There's also a very flawed police detective. When we meet him, he's abusing an asthma inhaler as a sort of a crutch against what is obviously post-traumatic stress disorder. And he and his partner are dealing with a bizarre murder on New York's High Line, which those of you who live in New York will, it's a converted, elevated subway platform that's tremendously popular as a green space. It's a place for jogging and walking and picnicking and whatnot. And all of those elements combined, by the time you are 50 pages into this thing, you are immersed in the world here of the main character, the detective, his partner, rabble-rousing journalist, and her totally emotionally unconnected daughter, the city's mayor, who is at first blush portrayed as just a standard corrupt nincompoop, but gains dimension as he goes on in the book in a wonderful way. And, of course, the budding problem with elevators. So it's just, I loved it. Absolutely loved it. It's not Tolstoy, but boy, oh boy, is it a whole lot more effective than I thought it was going to be when I read the original, when I got the advanced copy. And those are the four that I have read for this Tuesday, TBR Torture, if any of them appeal to you. And then there's two coming up. There's two that are right on my launchpad that I am going to read. And the first one is going to infuriate me. I know this already. Probably both of them will, but in different ways. The first one is a political book. It's a Trump book. This one is by Jason Chaffetz, and it is the other side. It's not a Trump book in the sense of the million of them saying he's deranged, he's fascistic, he's a lunatic. This one instead is saying that the Democrats are all of those things. This is called Power Grab. There is Nancy Pelosi acting aggressive. Can't have a woman do that, can we? And the subtitle is The Liberal Scheme to Undermine Trump, the GOP, and Our Republic. So I know already that this is going to infuriate me, and I opened it at random to a page. I haven't started it yet, but I opened it at random. I don't think this is page 112. Wouldn't that be something if it were? No, this is page 135. This is the beginning of chapter 6. And this is random. I'm sure I'm going to get this all throughout the book. Chapter 6 starts out this way. The first bill introduced in a new Congress is often a symbolic piece of legislation that indicates what is most important to the incoming majority. For the 115th Congress under Speaker Paul Ryan, H.R. 1 was a tax reform. This was the policy Republicans had run on, and it was ultimately the signature accomplishment of President Trump's first term. The passage of that bill gave middle-class families a huge tax cut, resulting in more jobs, higher wages, low inflation, low unemployment, and a robust consumer spending. None of that is true, especially the part about giving middle-class taxpayers a huge tax cut. And so that gives me an idea right away of what I'm going to get in the rest of this book. But I have already determined that I am going to read these things. So I'm going to read it, infuriated or not. If it infuriates me in an intelligent or an important way, unlikely in the case of that excerpt, then I'll review it. And then this next book is probably going to infuriate me as well, but in a different way, in a far more familiar way, that's for sure. This is the new book by Stephen King. This is The Institute. Which has a kind of a lovely cover, and comes out, I think, in early September. September 10th. This comes out on September 10th. And this is basically a story about kids who have superpowers. So it's going to be 600 pages or 400 pages or whatever of Stephen King trying to write children, which he has been doing for 50 years now, ineptly. He consistently, persistently writes about children, and yet he has never gotten any better at doing that. Never. So I imagine this will be the same. Let me tell you a little bit about it here. In the middle of the night, in a house on a quiet suburban street in suburban Minneapolis, intruders silently murder Luke Ellis's parents and load him into a black SUV. The operation takes less than 2 minutes. Luke will wake up at the Institute, in a room that looks just like his own, except there's no windows. And outside his doors are other doors, behind which other kids with special talents, telekinesis, telepathy, who got to this place in the same way that Luke did. There's Kalisha, Nick, George, Iris, and the youngest of them, 10-year-old Avery Dixon. They are all in front half. Those are in capital letters, front half. Others, Luke learns, graduate back half, like the Roach Motel, Kalisha says. Kids check in, but they don't check out. In other words, if we go by her sense of humor, Kalisha is 70. And that it never crosses Stephen King's mind to update any of that. I guarantee you, one of these kids will make a joke about Roto-Rooter. When they're kids in the 21st century. King's books are full of stuff like that. He hasn't bothered to update his mental reference book ever. So Kalisha, is talking about the Roach Motel. Because, kids check in, but they don't check out. Remember that? Huh? Remember that television advertisement segment from the early 1970s? 50 full years ago? Anyway, in its most sinister of institutions, the director, Mrs. Sigsbee, and her staff are ruthlessly dedicated to extracting from these children the force of their extra-normal gifts. There are no scruples here. If you go along, you get tokens for the vending machines. If you don't, punishment is brutal. As each new victim disappears to back half, Luke becomes more and more desperate to get out and get help, but no one has ever escaped from the Institute. So, on the one level, this is fairly familiar, Stephen King. We'll see. We'll see. There were parts of his book, The Outsider, that's fairly recent, that actually entertained me for stretches of time. I think this is largely, almost surgically, a talentless writer who would be bearable now in his 150th book if he ever troubled to learn anything about his craft, but he doesn't. The Roach Motel, Roto-Rooter, hey, where's the beef? You're going to have 7-year-old kids saying, where's the beef? Because Stephen King still says it. That's all. Because he hasn't bothered to look at popular culture in 30 years. And yet he's writing... Well, anyway. Believe it or not, despite what I sound like right now, I am going to give this a fair read. I am. I promise I'm going to read this with an open mind, and we will see what we will see. So that is my my Tuesday reads, my Tuesday TBR torture. We have The Institute by Stephen King. We have Power Grab by Jason Chaffetz, about how the Democrats are grabbing power, even though for 2 years the Republicans ruled the Supreme Court, the executive, the legislative, and every state, local, and municipal government anywhere in the country, and got nothing done at all, except passing a tax cut for the upper 1/1% of wealthy people in the United States. Oh, and also cutting the teeth out of environmental regulations to the point where we're days away from the Trump administration authorizing drilling and fracking in Yellowstone National Park. So yeah, so there's that too. Also, a rapist on the Supreme Court. But anyway, then we have Elevator Pitch by Linwood Barclay. Not again. I don't want to overpraise it. It's not Tolstoy, but boy, oh boy, is it a gripping thriller. If you want a thriller to just hold you still in your chair, if you want maybe a palate cleanser from Tolstoy, you're gonna love it. You're just gonna love it. Then the collected novels of Charles Wright in a new paperback release. Very nice. Man with a Blue Scarf, the account of sitting for Lucian Freud and what he's like. And Superman of Smallville, a little $10 children's novel that is about Superboy of Smallville and Krypto the Superdog, no matter what it says that it's about. And that is my Tuesday reads. But there is a treat at the end here, because a little while ago, earlier this morning, I took out some food for my sparrows. I have a bunch of sparrows in the lilac tree out front. I've been feeding them several times a day for several years. And I do it in thick and thin. I started doing it in the winter because, they live here year-round. They live in the siding of the house. But winter can be tough for birds that live here. It's hard to find food. They have massive population drop-offs. So I started that way, but now I feed them all the time. And just put it mildly, they are not grateful. they are an awful, mobby, argumentative, violent sort. And when I bring out food for them, they hang around in the lilac branches just sort of yelling at me to hurry up, telling me I'm doing it wrong. I'm telling you, they'd also rather fight than eat. I've seen this. I've watched them after I leave out food, and they would rather fight with each other than eat. There was plenty of food for everybody, but they'd rather fight with each other than eat. In other words, my sparrows are the Irish Americans of the bird world. In every conceivable way. We're a match made in heaven. But when I was out there just recently, to bring out the latest food for them, I noticed a package. There's a package on the porch. It's obviously from one of you. I don't know who delivered it. It must be a new driver or something, or somebody extra, but I thought we'd open this together. This could be lots of fun. Although people really shouldn't be going to the bother of sending me presents. I mean, after all, isn't the enormous amount of money that you pledge every month on my Patreon enough? What is this, Bean? You don't care about the books, you want the package. Ooh, what's that? What have we got here? Oh, what on earth? What are you people doing? Oh my, look at that. Okay, there's no note here. Some one of you just decided to give these to me. That is so strange. Okay. Well, I thank you. You know who you are. How wonderful. Okay, so these are for the biography section. I have made no secret of the fact on this channel that biography is my favorite kind of reading. I love to do it. In a perfect world, that's all I would ever read. And I don't think, if somebody would offer me, you know, a going wage, a living annual wage to review only biographies and not read anything else, I could make that decision and almost not regret it. I'm sorry, Bean. Am I boring you? And these are two books that are not currently in my biography section. Maybe one of you was watching, and maybe I mentioned that I don't have them, so you just decided to send them. The first one is, this is Blanche Wiesen Cook. She is great. And she did a multi-volume biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. This is volume 1 of young Eleanor. And you could tell even with volume 1, this probably has blurbs. Okay, it has blurbs. The Abigail McCarthy, at the Washington Post loved it. Jill Kirk Conway loved it. And most of all, Gloria Steinem loved it. So case closed. Enough said. Even with this volume 1 in this series, you could tell that this was going to be one of those biographical events that, you know, is why I read the genre. I'm perfectly happy to read the latest General Patton biography, but every once in a while, something will come along, often in multi-volumes, that is just obviously, a standard setter, a top-notch in the genre. And this was what you could tell even in volume 1 that this was one of them. And I think I reviewed the final volume in this. I think by the time the third volume came out, this has been slow in the building, and Blanche Wiesen Cook is a wonderful, wonderful raconteur. She knows this subject inside and out. And I think by the time the third volume came out, I was back in the reviewing game, and I think I got a chance to weigh in on this series. But I don't have the third volume, I don't have the second volume, and I didn't have this. Now I do. Now I have the first volume. That's wonderful. I'd be happy to reread this. Boy, this is a Penguin trade paperback. I wonder if Penguin must have made them all. Boy, that would be so nice to have just this as this is a Penguin. It'd be so nice to have just the 3 of these on the shelf. I shouldn't say that. Or you people will go out and buy me volume 2 and volume 3. Well, anyway, that's the first one in this care package, and the other book on here is also something that is an absolute must-have. And that I have had in the past, I've given it away. It wasn't in my biography section, and one of you must have remembered that. This is My Life by Bill Clinton. The big, gigantic book that he was contracted to write, and he delayed, and he delayed, and he delayed, and he got some pretty high-powered help in writing this thing, and that still delayed and delayed and delayed, even though he'd made a huge amount of money. He pretty much burned through all the money that he was given in advance for the publisher, and then finally had to write the book. And people immediately started calling it My Life, because that's how he would pronounce it when he was in his Vim and Viga. And it's terrific. It really is. I myself am far more fond of the second half of the book than growing up in Hardscrabble Hope, Arkansas. The early autobiographical parts of the book are done really well. They're really bald and effective. But it's the second half is Clinton and his ghostwriter, his collaborator, writing about American politics from the inside out, and that is just tremendously involving, just tremendously readable. You might struggle in the first half of this book, but you will fly through the second half of it. And now I have it. Now I have a copy of it, and it's a gift. How wonderful! I mean, I should stress, you have to take a lot of this with a grain of salt, but still. And of course, the story's not over. Boy, oh boy, fantastic! Wow. All right, well, I'm going to read. So I'm probably going to read the back half of both of these books. I probably won't read the whole of them at one sitting, but I will read the back half of both of them. Wow. Okay. All right, great. So there you go. So in addition to my stack of books, there was also 2 gifts. Can't beat that. Thank you very much. And of course, there's the bean. Oh. We went out just a little while ago, and it's beautiful outside, but it is starting to get a little warm, and that just gets to Frida. She's perfectly happy to go outside, loves to launch herself at people and make them pat her, but heat could be getting a little too hot today. We'll go out right now, and that'll probably be the last of our long treks before tomorrow. But anyway, that is just a random bookish video of the type you expect, and I will wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.